Welcome back, everyone. I'm Jordan Giesecke, and this is The Limiting Factor. Today, we're going to be talking about Tesla's Q2 earnings call from a battery perspective. The key takeaway of this earnings call was that Tesla still seems to be struggling in some fundamental ways with the 4680 production ramp. Now, personally, I'm not terribly concerned about that for two reasons. First, I view the 4680 production system, which includes the dry battery electrode and the tabless electrode, as an A architecture. So any investments that Tesla makes now, it's going to pay for itself. It's going to be worthwhile in the next 5 to 10 years for Tesla to invest in this. And second, not only that, they also have cell supply lined up for at least the next 6 months, if not the next 2 years, based on what Drew and Elon said in the earnings call. As always, thanks to my Patreon supporters and YouTube members for making this channel possible, especially in the last few weeks where you can probably hear a little bit that I had COVID. And if I was totally dependent on ad revenues, I wouldn't be able to continue the channel. But thanks to the Patreon support, I can just keep going. With that, let's get into the earnings call. In Elon's opening statement in the earnings call, he says that in Berlin and Giga Texas, we are currently making the cars with 2170 battery cells. Now, some people have assumed this to mean that Tesla's not using 4680 battery cells any longer at Giga Texas. Now, I don't know whether that's the case or not, or if that's the case or not. And to me, it doesn't make a difference. As long as they have the battery cells they need to go into those vehicles, that's fine. It may actually simplify the production process at Giga Texas if they're just using one cell form factor. And any additional cells that they have with the 4680, they can just stockpile those for later this year or even on into next year for the Cybertruck. And on that note, Elon goes on to say, it is worth emphasizing that we have enough 2170 cells to satisfy all vehicle production for the remainder of the year. So we're not dependent on the 4680. The 4680 will be important next year, but it is not important for this year. End quote. Now, this is something that I already covered off in the last earnings call, and that is that right now, if they have enough battery cells, they're fine if the 4680 is ramping slowly. However, it may start impacting vehicle ramps next year with the Cybertruck, Semi, and Roadster, and that could start becoming a concern. Now, hopefully, at the next earnings call or the earnings call after that, we have some analysts that actually start asking some insightful questions and dig into this. There was a lot of missed opportunities in this earnings calls where the analysts just completely dropped the ball and they were just taking up space on the earnings call, asking questions that had no bearing on anything. Next, Elon says, that said, we've installed the second generation of manufacturing equipment for 4680 cells in Texas. End quote. Now, why this is relevant is because Tesla still has a lot of confidence in this 4680 production process, and Elon reiterates that later in the call. So they have a lot of confidence in it. They're just, it's an entirely new technology with the dry battery electrode and the tabless design. So they're bound to run into hiccups, and it looks like they've hit more hiccups than they expected, which we'll get into more detail later in the video. Elon follows up by saying, and even at our established factories like Fremont and Shanghai, we continue to expand capacity. Now he's kind of merged two completely different ideas here. One, he's talking about 4680 cell production capacity in Texas, and now he's shifted gears in the next sentence talking about vehicle capacity. So I think the implication of that is Tesla continues to expand their vehicle production capacity despite the fact that they're having issues with the 4680 cell production system. And once again, that goes back to the fact that they have plenty of battery cells to ramp these vehicles, so they may as well keep expanding capacity. As an interesting side note, and as part of Elon's opening statements here, he says we will bring another level of simplicity and manufacturing improvements with Cybertruck and future products that we're not quite ready to talk about now, but I think will be very exciting in the future to unveil. End quote. Every earnings call, Drew and Elon drop in some teases, and this was a really good tease. We already know about the gigacastings, the structural battery pack, the 4680 battery cells, and basically Tesla's version 2.0 of their production system for the Model Y. But what are they talking about here? Because what other improvements can be made to the manufacturing process. Personally, I don't know. So I'm excited for them to unveil a bit more. But I have a feeling it's probably going to be, 6 months or a year before they share any of that. The reason why I say that is because currently Tesla has this massive pig in the python with the 4680 production ramp. And also there's the Tesla Semi. From memory, it was unveiled back in 2017 along with the Roadster. And here we are 5 years later, and those vehicles aren't in production, and they don't look like they're going to be in production for another year. So they really need to digest this set of products that were promised years ago and get these out of the way before they start throwing more at us. At least I'll be more receptive and much more interested hearing about Tesla's new technologies if some of these other things are squared away and taken care of. All right, let's move on to the investors' questions portion of the earnings call. So the first question was, Chinese EV manufacturers seem to be doing a better job than their Western competitors, excluding Tesla, at innovating in software and design. How can Tesla make sure the company is staying ahead of those manufacturers, both within China and outside of China? End quote. So Elon responds, quote, well, right now, the best Chinese EV manufacturer is Tesla. We're actually doing the best thanks to our incredible team in China. But I have a lot of respect for the Chinese, our manufacturers, and EV manufacturers in particular. I think they will be a force to be reckoned with worldwide. End quote. Now, personally, I'd like to add into what Elon is saying here, because I'm seeing a lot of impressive work from both CATL and BYD on the battery front. And a lot of people are noticing that as well, and they ask me a lot of questions about whether BYD and CATL are quote-unquote moving ahead of Tesla. For me, the answer to that is no. I think each company is developing their own architecture based on the type of chemistry that they prefer to use. And this is something that I'll go into more in the first part of the 4680 teardown series. I think we need to pan back a little bit and look at the relevance of the 4680 and what the implications are compared to whatever else might be on the market, and what the purpose of the 4680 battery cell itself is for Tesla's strategy. The next question that was asked at the earnings call was in relation to, will Tesla be lowering prices at any point, and how are material prices affecting Tesla's vehicle prices? And this is something that's been done to death already in the last earnings call. So I won't go through all of that again, but I will revisit something that Elon said here, which is, quote, there's like software margins in lithium processing right now. So I would really like to encourage, once again, entrepreneurs to enter the lithium refining business, end quote. Now, as with the last earnings call, I said that the main reason why I think Elon is saying this is he wants more people to get into the lithium business so Tesla doesn't have to. But there was a few comments online from people who are experts in this space calling out some of what Elon's saying here isn't the whole story. Yes, there are large potential margins in the lithium space, but only if you own the mine itself plus the lithium refining capacity. And those things take years to bring online. So it's not just like, Elon can snap his fingers. You bring people into this space and they're going to get these amazing margins. And another thing worth taking into account, the last thing worth taking into account, is the fact that China pretty much has a monopoly in the refining space. They tend to import most of their lithium supplies from other countries. So there's actually plenty of lithium refining capacity right now in China. And there's other producers ex-China, outside of China, that are trying to get into the lithium refining business. But it's difficult because China is stiff competition. However, with potential new legislation that could be coming into play in several countries, it might help shift that balance and help start encouraging local supply of lithium. The next question from investors was, quote, Elon noted that the 4680 plus structural pack is not yet optimized. Can you please share the general path of 4680 and structural packs in terms of cost efficiencies when compared to the traditional 2170 battery pack? Will cost improvements be mostly due to scale, or do we need to solve some technical issues? End quote. Elon responds, quote, I think unequivocally from a physics standpoint, it's the A architecture. Now, because it is new, we will start off getting, aspirationally a C within an A architecture, end quote. He goes on to say, quote, even the C and the A architecture is beating the non-structural pack, and so over time it will, with further refinement, be substantially superior, end quote. So obviously what Elon is saying here is we're looking at a version 1 of the structural pack with the 4680 coming out of Austin. And over time, they plan on improving that. And I think to fully understand what Elon is saying here, we have to take a look back at the history of the Model Y. The Model Y started off with like a stamped body structure rather than a gigacast structure. And it also started with a regular 2170 battery pack where the battery pack is carried more like a sack of potatoes rather than a structural member within the vehicle. Well, now they're making these Model Ys with the castings, and they've kind of had to shoehorn those castings into a vehicle that was originally designed with the stampings. And then on top of that, with the structural pack itself, right now they're using 2 different battery packs within the Model Ys coming out of Texas and potentially also Berlin when we get 4680 battery packs going there. And what happens there is that, you know, if it was just the 4680 battery pack being used in the Model Y, they could optimize around that stiffer pack and potentially get more performance improvements out of it in terms of like weight reduction. But the fact that they have to optimize for 2 different packs at the same time means that it's definitely not a fully optimized architecture. And on top of that, this is just version 1. They're trying to stitch in all these new technologies into the Model Y when it wasn't originally designed for that. As soon as they're able to work from a blank slate, or if they have enough time to incorporate these technologies into the Model Y, we'll see improvements with the gigacastings and the structural pack itself. Then there's a follow-up question on that, which was, and on cost improvements, are they due to scale or about solving technical issues? End quote. Drew Baglino answers that question, and he says, quote, getting to the optimal design right, like you always start with some excess. Some people might call it fat, but it's not really what you think it is initially. It's that you don't know how you can get to the leanest design until you've done it a couple of times, end quote. So from my perspective, we have 2 things going here. There's what I just said about the fact that they kind of have to shoehorn this new technology into an old architecture. But what also I think Drew is saying here is it's if you've ever built something, the first time you build it, you just want to build it quickly. You tend to overbuild things when you build them for the first time, and you have this excess fat built into the system. And as soon as you understand how that product or that thing works, then you can start trimming out the things that you don't need. So right now they're on a version 1, and as they work in the future, they might be able to strip out a lot of this excess packaging within the structural pack. Because as we saw with Sandy Monroe's teardown, this thing is bulletproof. They're having a lot of difficulty pulling apart this 4680 structural pack from Texas. The next question was, quote, how is the 4680 ramp going? And is GigaTexas producing cells yet? End quote. Drew Baglino responds, quote, we expect to ramp total 4680 production to exceed 1,000 per week by the end of the year. Hopefully well before, end quote. So let's put that 1,000 packs per week into perspective. Some people have questioned whether that's, first off, whether that's packs or whether that's cells, but it's pretty clear to me that they're referring to 1,000 packs per week by the end of the year rather than cells. Because if it was just cells, that would only be 1 pack. And I'm sure that they're well beyond that production rate, even right now. So 1,000 packs per week is about 4 gigawatt hours of cells per year. At Battery Day, Tesla said they expected to hit 100 gigawatt hours of production by this year. And the assumption was that was, 100 gigawatt hours of cells produced. Now, last year, they updated the advice and they said that, well, we're hoping maybe there's a 50% chance that we're hit 100 gigawatt hour run rate by the end of the year. Not total cells produced, but just run rate. And now they're saying that they're hoping to exit the year at about a 4 gigawatt hour run rate by the end of the year. So expectations have clearly been pulled well back. But, 1,000 packs per week, that's enough to get a Cybertruck ramp started. even if that Cybertruck ramp started at the end of this year. But the Cybertruck ramp isn't starting at the end of this year, it's starting halfway through next year. 1,000 packs per week is obviously, about 26,000 Cybertrucks for the second half of next year. And that would be, based on the fact that the Cybertruck is an entirely new architecture, that would be a fairly reasonable expectation for the number of Cybertrucks produced in the second half of next year. It all depends on, for instance, how big those battery packs are, because the Cybertruck battery packs could be anywhere between 80 kilowatt hours and 180 to 200 kilowatt hours for those battery packs. Overall, my takeaway here is that if Tesla hits these goals that they're saying, if they hit a minimum of 1,000 packs per week by the end of this year with the 4680 cell and pack production system, that they'll be well on track to support a Cybertruck ramp. However, if they keep ramping at about 35% per month, which is what they indicated in the earnings call, about a 35% month-over-month improvement rate, then they should have enough battery cells for both a solid Cybertruck ramp as well as the Roadster and Semi. But I'm not holding my breath at this point. We've seen them continually pull back their expectations and their forecasts about how the 4680 ramp is going. I wouldn't be particularly concerned if there were delays with the Semi and Roadster. My concern is that, at least in the long run, that they get this 4680 production system working. That's the main thing. But let's say worst case scenario that it didn't, and that they had to start using a wet process. It wouldn't be a complete waste of time and waste of capital. They would have run down that lead. And now I don't think that's going to happen. I don't think they're going to switch to a wet process, and I'll get into that with the 4680 Teardown Deep Dive series. But I do think that they would be able to salvage a lot of what they've done with this 4680 production system. The dry battery electrode is just one portion of it. And if they get it to work, then it puts them I don't like thinking in terms of putting them years ahead of other competitors, but it puts them at the head of the industry, and it makes Tesla's life a lot easier if they can get the dry battery electrode working. So now this is a good chance to get into the types of issues that Tesla might be having with their dry battery electrode process. Now, last year, at one of the earnings calls, they indicated that they're having issues with the cathode side of rolling out these dry battery electrodes. And the way they phrased it, it made it sound like it was one of the last major issues, the least lucky issues in the production process. Well, to me, based on what they said in the earnings call last week, it sounds like they're having more fundamental issues than they were hinting to or indicating to before. For instance, Drew said, "We fully automated powder conveyance." Now, what I did here is I dug into some of the Maxwell patents. Maxwell is the company that Tesla got the dry battery electrode process from. Now, the basic process there is you take these different powders and you mix them together, and then you fibrilize them. And what's happening in the fibrillization process is you're taking these Teflon microbeads, and then you're stretching them out into these like these gossamer spider-like threads that hold together that electrode. It holds together all those different materials in the electrode. And that's why it's called a dry electrode process. There's no wet material used. You're just taking Teflon, you're stretching it out, and it's forming like a matrix that holds the whole thing together. Now, that fibrillization can be done with like a jet mill, or it can be done with what looks like an auger system. Regardless of which way Tesla is doing this, there's this tricky space when you're going from taking that dry powder and fibrillizing it into kind of a dough, and then you have to turn that into a freestanding film. It's really, technically, to me, it sounded extraordinarily difficult. And when I first saw the dry battery electrode process, I assumed that would be one of the sticking points, because that would be the heart of the system, dry powder to freestanding film. So after you take that jet milled material, you have to feed it into a dry feed system where it goes through a roll mill, and then that's when it turns into a dry film after it's gone through the roll mill. And after that, it goes through calendaring, which is just compressing the material, and then it's bonded to a current collector and spooled onto a storage roll. So that's what you can see generally laid out here. And I also created another visual here where it's a more of a visual description of what's going on. You have the jet mill, and then there's a little bit of material coming out of the jet mill into the roll mill, and then to a dry film, and again calendaring, and then heating that material onto an electrode foil, bonding it, and then putting it onto a storage roll. So Drew said we fully automated powder conveyance. What I'm assuming he meant is conveying the powder into the dry feed process, but that's just a guess on my part. And part of the reason why I'm saying that is because later in the call, Elon said some of the more challenging issues have been feeding the anode-cathode material. And to me, it seems like he's referring to the dry feed process there specifically, taking that dry powder and actually rolling it into the film and then feeding it through the process. So I think that's where they're having issues, and I'm eager to see how this pans out over the next couple of quarters to see if they've actually resolved the fundamental issues with the dry battery electrode. The final point Drew made on the 4680 production progress was, quote, "Our target for Texas is to begin production this quarter and aim for Texas to be capable of exceeding Kato weekly output before the end of this year," end quote. Well, let's put that in perspective. Kato Road is designed for 10 gigawatt hours of production capacity. Texas is designed for at least 100 gigawatt hours of production capacity. So although it'll be good to see Texas hit a production rate that's on par with Kato Road, it'll be just the very beginning of production at Giga Texas. And what I'm hoping we'll see, because the way I understand Texas is laid out is there's 5 dry battery electrode machines, and each of those 5 delivers about 20 gigawatt hours of production capacity. My guess is that they're going to start with one of those, just one 20 gigawatt hour of capacity, and they're going to focus on that. And as soon as they get that spooled up, and as soon as they get that down, then they're going to start copying it to the other lines. And I think that's where we'll really see things start to get moving at Texas and Berlin. After they get one of these 20 gigawatt hour machines up and running and get a good throughput, hopefully they can just copy and paste. And then over the course of just maybe a few quarters, we'll see a doubling, tripling, quadrupling of the amount of production capacity that they're getting out of Texas or Berlin. But we'll see how things go. It may be that they have a lot of difficulties ramping each one, but in the past, Tesla has a pretty good learning curve, and they can apply what they've learned to accelerate future ramps. So the first analyst question we're going to cover is from Pierre Ferragu, and he says, or his question was, quote, "And I'd love to understand where you stand on the technology and efficiency and energy density roadmap that you described at Battery Day. So what I'm trying to understand is, where do you stand on the architecture of the battery cell itself? How much silicon do you have in it? How much energy density improvement have you achieved already so far?" And the reason why I'm asking this is because you have very smart guys on Twitter who suggested that maybe these cars had very, very high mileage, very high range, and were artificially limited in range in software. So I'm just trying to understand how much of an edge you're building at the moment with the 4680 and the battery pack on range, end quote. Now, some people thought this was referring to potentially my teardown, but it's pretty clear to me that Pierre hasn't seen my teardown. And that's for 2 reasons. First, I never said anything about silicon in the battery cells, and in fact, I was downplaying the energy density. And maybe I didn't downplay the energy density enough, but we'll come to that in future videos. Second, I never got involved in the Twitter debate that he's talking about. I've been trying to avoid that as much as possible. There's a lot of speculation out there, and I think that speculation has been occurring on incomplete information. So I'll wait for the actual information to come out, and then we'll analyze it like we usually do when confirmed information actually comes out. So Drew jumps in to respond. Our priority was really on simplicity and scale during the initial 4680 and structural battery ramp. So we weren't putting the bells and whistles on from day one. But as we attain the manufacturing goals that we've stated in the ramp and we need to hit next year, we're certainly planning to layer in new material technologies and higher range structural packs, end quote. And this is going to be one of the key themes of the 4680 teardown deep dive videos that I do. It's very clear to me that Tesla's been as careful as possible with this 4680 battery ramp. And as Elon goes on to say here, quote, "So the first order of business is really to get the basics right, to get high volume and high reliability, and then very rapidly iterate within that to enhance energy density and reduce the cost of the cell," end quote. So it's at this point, it's all about just getting things working. And people are right now looking for these massive energy density increases and gains, which doesn't make sense, because first you have to get the whole production system working, and then you can start iterating on it and making improvements. Elon goes on to say, quote, "I'd say we're highly confident of a good outcome," end quote. And it's comforting to hear that. And quite often I look at Tesla's actions to get an indication of how things are going and what their intent is. And the fact that they're still continuing to put so much resources into this 4680 production system, and they're continuing to build out their factories in Berlin and Austin, it indicates to me that, they have 100% faith in it. But that said, it's good to hear Elon saying that they're confident of a good outcome, because it provides that little bit of extra reassurance and just knowing where their head is at. Elon goes on to say, "Tesla battery cell production is in addition to what our suppliers can do, and we want our suppliers to grow their battery output as fast as they possibly can, and that goes for the entire supply chain. The fundamental rate limiter for transitioning to sustainable energy is how fast you can grow with the amount of battery output per year," end quote. And once again, this is something I'm going to be covering in the first video of the Teardown series, is what is the point of the 4680 and where is it, where does that stand in this field of battery cell production and all the different suppliers that Tesla is purchasing battery cells from. It goes back to something that I've been saying for years now, which is that Tesla will take any battery cell that they can and they'll weave that straw into gold, and they'll play battery Tetris. They need every battery cell that they can get from every supplier. And the 4680 is just icing on the cake. Now, Drew jumps in here and he says something that resonates with me, and it's kind of dear to my heart, which is, quote, "Yes, I just want to stress that a lot of these higher energy density technologies are not necessarily scalable. I mean, most of them are not scalable from what I've seen. And so, focusing on them is a distraction from the mission. It really is, how do we scale as fast as possible?" End quote. So, just reinforcing what Drew is saying here is that a lot of these whiz-bang, sparkly new battery chemistries that you hear about, they sound great, and I'm sure they're hitting the energy densities that they're claiming in their marketing material. The issue is, what aren't they telling you? And what they aren't telling you often is that these battery cells are either A, going to cost more, they're going to have cycle life issues, or potentially they won't be able to hit the production rates that Tesla is anticipating hitting with their 4680 production system. And it's worth noting that Tesla's 4680 production system, the higher energy densities that we can expect to see are a side effect of the base production system that they're putting in place. And the most important part of the production system is the rate that it allows them to accelerate the production of these battery cells. And that's what they emphasized on Battery Day, which was continuous motion, increasing output, getting 7 times more battery production out of a similar area, and drastically reducing the amount of capital that requires to start one of these battery cell factories. Drew goes on to say, quote, "And we're taking these risks that we discussed at Battery Day, and our plan is, as we de-risk them and as they're successful, we want to bring them back to our partners so that they can go faster too, because that's all on the mission, right? How do we accelerate?" End quote. That final sentence is really interesting to me, because it sounds like what they're saying here is that after they get this dry battery electrode production system, after they work the kinks out of it, they're thinking about sharing that with their suppliers, which really surprises me. I thought the dry battery electrode system, if they get it working, it's something that they'd hold on to pretty tightly, and that they would continue to have the best battery cells in the industry, or at least the cheapest battery cells in the industry for that given form factor and whatever chemistry they choose to use. Elon follows up and reinforces what Drew is saying here. with, quote, "People often ask me, if you ask me, is some breakthrough needed in battery technology for the world to transition to sustainable energy? The answer is no. Even if there was zero technology breakthroughs, so literally zero from where the technology is right now, we could fully transition Earth to sustainable energy." End quote. This takes the words right out of my mouth. This is something I beat the drum on a few times. We have all the technology here, particularly with what Tesla unveiled at Battery Day. This is the machine that will allow us to transition the world to sustainable energy. And even if Tesla hadn't built that machine, even if they weren't planning on scaling it, there's such a huge amount of momentum that's built over the last 10 to 15 years with battery technology and storage that it's just a matter of time at this point. So what is the point of these higher energy density battery cells? It makes your vehicle a little bit more efficient. We actually already have battery cells that can give you 1,000 kilometers or 600 miles of range. The reason you don't see vehicles with battery packs that large is because it makes more sense to put more vehicles on the road. You can put 300-mile vehicles on the road for each 600-mile vehicle. So if you're willing to pay for that extra range, by all means, go for it. Buy one of these expensive cars that has an enormous amount of range. But if you're Tesla and your goal is to transition the world to accelerate the transition to sustainable energy, then it makes more sense to put more vehicles on the road with less mileage. And on top of that, try to build as many robo-taxis as you possibly can. So energy density, it's just a bonus. And the main thing that we're going to need it for is transitioning flight to sustainable energy. But even then, that's a whole another set of videos. It's going to take decades for that to happen. Pierre Ferragu follows up with, quote, "I'm kind of wondering, as you're planning for this 50% per annum growth, if we stand today over the next 5 to 10 years, how much of that do you feel you've secured through your work entering into long-term contracts and things like that? And you were calling for entrepreneurs to go into the lithium business. So does that mean you don't have lithium secured to grow at 50% per annum over multiple years?" End quote. And you can tell Elon's getting a little bit frustrated here because part of Pierre's question is looking 5 to 10 years ahead, do you have enough material supply to grow at 50% per year? And Elon responds, well, I think it's very difficult to predict anything 10 years from now. If we assume a 50% growth rate over 10 years, you're looking at 60 times the current supply of lithium that Tesla and other manufacturers are using. I mean, just doubling the supply of lithium that we have in the world is quite an amazing accomplishment. And that's happening every couple of years. So going beyond 2 years is kind of ridiculous in the first place. Tesla is putting their feelers out, but it's not like there's a giant hill of lithium out there and Tesla can just carve out a portion. When Tesla organizes these long-term contracts, it's for supply that's coming online. It's for supply that doesn't exist today. So there's this complex dance that happens throughout the entire supply chain to make sure that you get the right quality of material and the right amount at the right time to the right company. All right, then Drew jumps in and he provides a more clear and specific answer for Pierre because Pierre had a jumble of questions there. Drew kind of reaches in and he gives a specific answer. He says, quote, "Yes. The other thing I would say is we're working with our suppliers to ramp their capability as quickly as possible. And it's not like we have a problem in the next year or 2 years specifically to your question. But when we look 10 years out, yes, we need to do more to accelerate growth, and that is why we are making our own investments. We're working on lithium refining activity as well ourselves because that's the best way to learn how to accelerate how to do something is to do it yourself." End quote. So just to recap what Drew said there, Tesla said in the past that they have a pretty good raw materials runway. I'm pretty sure that they've said that 1 to 2 years in recent interviews, actually. I think both Drew and Elon said that they have a pretty good materials runway looking out for at least a couple of years. And I said the same thing in my Tesla Solving the Materials Bottleneck video. Now, also in that Solving Materials Bottleneck video, and I recommend watching that if you have any long-term interest in Tesla, how do you get those raw materials? And you have to pull every lever that you possibly can. And that's what Drew's saying here. We simply can't throw enough resources at this problem. It's going to require a global effort. And in some cases, it might require rebuilding the social agreement with people around mining, because one of the biggest bottlenecks for producing lithium and other raw materials is mining. And I think we need to have an adult conversation in the United States, particularly about the role of mining and how it can be done both safely and quickly. Right now, the average time it takes to get a mine rolling in the United States is 10 years, and some take even longer than that. And the final comment that Drew made here about they're working on lithium refining activity, I'm really happy to hear that, because they do currently have a cathode factory going up in Texas, and I was hoping that after the cathode factory, you move one step upstream into lithium hydroxide processing. And I'm hoping they start working on a lithium hydroxide plant next year. That would be really good if we start seeing construction for that in Austin in 2023. In summary, the 4680 production system, it looks like it's having some issues with fundamental parts of the production ramp. Now, I don't think by any means, I don't think that means that it's doomed, because the 4680 production system spans a whole lot of different technologies and a whole lot of different steps within the process of making a battery cell. So it looks like it's just the dry battery electrode part of the process. And it looks like they're slowly working through that and getting over it. Now, in my teardown video of the 4680, the deep dive series that I'm going to do, I'm going to walk you through exactly the importance of that dry battery electrode process, why it's extremely helpful to Tesla and puts them in a great position, but also why, if it didn't pan out, everything would be all right. You just have to, you wouldn't be getting as much productivity per square meter out of your factories, but you'd still be getting your battery cells a lot cheaper than any other place, and you'd still be hitting a production rate that's higher than anybody else's, just because Tesla's worked on every aspect of the production system, and they've chosen the right form factor, the right cell design to make that happen. However, I think that the 4680 cell production will continue to improve, and they'll eventually master it. Now, at this point, it doesn't look like that's going to cause any hiccups or hangups with future vehicle production if they continue at the rate that they're continuing at. We'll see how that continues to pan out. Tesla has been notoriously optimistic with the 4680 production ramp, so we just need to, well, hopefully people continue, or they will ask the right questions at upcoming earnings calls on the 4680 production ramp. With all that said, everything from my perspective with Tesla's overall vehicle ramp over the next year or two looks good based on what Tesla's saying and what we're seeing in the market. Any 4680 battery cells that we get are going to allow Tesla to roll out new products more quickly, and it'll be icing on the cake because they'll be able to get those cells more cheaply, and it'll improve their bottom line. I hope you enjoyed this video. If it provided any value for you, check out my Patreon or consider contributing to me as a YouTube member. As always, the links are in the description and on my YouTube homepage. Thanks for tuning in.